If you're just picking this up, no, we have not been kicked out of the Daily News usual studio. We're at the Ritz-Carlton Golf Resort in North Naples, thanks to the League Club and Iberia Bank, help bringing in our special guest, Doris Kearns-Goodwin, Pulitzer Prize-winning historian and author, and great interview. Let me ask you about baseball. Now,
my love.
Okay.
This is what I truly love. I mean, I'm supposed to be an historian, but ever since my father taught me how to keep score when I was 6 years old so that I could record for him the history of that afternoon's Brooklyn Dodger game, it made me realize there's something magic about history, even if it's only 5 hours old, to keep your father's attention. And I have loved that sport with a passion ever since.
And you managed to make the bridge from a New York baseball team to now the Boston Red Sox, which can be a little tricky sometimes.
Well, once the Dodgers abandoned us from Brooklyn and I moved to Boston, then the Red Sox seemed so similar to the old Brooklyn Dodgers, almost always winning and almost always losing in the end. Yeah. So they became my team.
Well, good. Let me ask you about something unrelated, but you were also a part of the Johnson administration. Let me ask you about the war on poverty. There's some debate today whether, that was a success or that was a failure. Can we get your take on that?
I think the most important thing is that as president, he made poverty a central issue. And it's a critical thing because if a country like ours loses mobility, the chance for people who are born at the lower segment not to move up the ladder of opportunity, it's really the promise of America that's at issue. Mm-hmm. So the fact that LBJ put his passion and power behind the war on poverty, whether the specific programs worked as they should have, whether there wasn't enough time, are questions for historians to answer. But the fact he put his stamp on it 50 years ago, he's the most formidable, interesting character I ever met. Of course, I met him at 24, dancing with him at the White House, working with him as an intern, helping him on his memoirs. It created my fascination with the presidency. I will never forget that huge character.
Let me ask you about from there, if you mentioned the war on poverty to some teenagers or even some college students today, they would look at you going, what is that? Can you size up the state of history, if you will, in America today in the schools where it's no longer required, it's no longer a fundamental element?
I think history is such an important subject for students to learn because if you can't learn from the struggles and the triumphs of the people who went before you, you're going to be just leading your own life in a vacuum. So that by teaching kids, great moments in our history as a country, great leaders and what we can learn from them, it's really making the child so much broader. And I worry sometimes about it when you see these incredible statistics of they don't know who X or Y is. Yes. The important thing for teachers is not so much even to create those facts, but to create a passion for understanding people. It's drama. People lived before us. There's no reason people shouldn't want to know about their conflicts and their problems.
And I wonder sometimes whether the internet and the social media is a friend or foe of history, because you would have your historical research tools at fingertips, yet the latest flashy thing online is more fun than reading about Abraham Lincoln.
No, it's a real question. I mean, I think to some extent what you still hope is that the excitement of doing historical research is working with real materials from the past. You read a letter from somebody, you read a diary. I mean, you can get on the internet the exact same information perhaps now, but you don't have that tactile feeling of actually looking at the letter or the diary that you did in the old days when you had to go to the libraries instead of looking something up on the internet. Mm-hmm. And then you change that for just kids who are not even doing either one of them. They're just saying, oh, this is breaking news. That's more interesting than the past.
Yes, yes.
But it never is.
Let me ask you, how about the impact of time and history on looking back and assessing a presidency?
It always takes time. I mean, I think it takes generations before you can figure out. I mean, for example, when we look at, there was only 1,000 days that JFK was president, and yet he did put the seeds in for some of the things that LBJ accomplished later on civil rights and voting rights, or even Medicare. Truman left the presidency at a very low ebb, and yet in time went by, we realized so much of what he did. Eisenhower, after a couple generations, people realized the fact that we weren't in a war during his time, after we were in these successive wars, made him look even better. And I think Reagan, too, after time, people realized what he had done with the Soviet Union. They realized what an extraordinary relationship he had with Nancy. And historians have to always have, I think, time to absorb the impact of the president on the context and what was possible and what wasn't.
Because some of their policies have yet to play out.
Exactly right. Exactly right. That's the main reason why. They set something in motion, and then later it may come to fruition or it may go bad. And that's what you have to see, usually a couple decades after the president's lived. I could never write about a current president. I definitely need them back in the past.
They're like Eisenhower's military-industrial complex. It's
exactly.
Just, oh, okay, now we get it.
Absolutely.
Who's next?
I think what I'm going to do is to bring all my guys into the room at the same time so that I can look at leadership. I mean, underneath, that's what I'm always writing about. What are the traits that made these presidents that I've written about great? Whether it's FDR or Teddy Roosevelt or JFK or Lincoln, and what do they share? Even though the problems differ over time, the human attributes of leadership remain the same. So I think I'm going to write about leadership and illustrate the points, not with PowerPoints like they often do, but rather with stories, because I really believe stories are the key to people's memory, to people enjoying a situation. We're DNA'd for storytelling from the old days when the oral historians would sit around a fire and tell the wisdom from one generation to the next. So through stories, I'd like to illustrate leadership from my guys.
Some of the best stories never get told, but you're going to fix that.
Oh, of course.
so tell me, the real question is, your latest book, again, plug, The Bully Pulpit, Theodore Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, and the Golden Age of Journalism. Who will play Teddy Roosevelt in the movie?
Well, there is going to possibly be a movie because Steven Spielberg has bought the rights of it. Yay. And there's all sorts of people to be thought of for Teddy. I mean, Tom Hanks is a possibility. Leonardo DiCaprio, one's a little younger, one's a little older. John Goodman is the one that everybody thinks of for Taft, because you've got to have a big man for Taft. And so, but Stephen figures that out. I mean, he figured out Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yeah, he did pretty well with it.
Unbelievably, I got a chance to take Daniel to Springfield. I got to know him pretty well as a friend, and he became Lincoln. It was an astonishing process to watch Daniel Day-Lewis submerge himself into Abraham Lincoln. So I trust that Stephen knows far better than I who could be Teddy, who could be Archie Butt, one of the characters in here, Edith Roosevelt, Nellie. There's like 5 people that are the big characters, and it'll be fun.
Thank you so much for your time, and have a good visit to Naples.
I'm glad to be here.
Come back and see us.
Deal.
Okay, Doris Kearns-Goodwin, thank you again to the Philanthropic League Club and Iberia Bank for help making this possible. We're going to go back to this